Hey everybody, it's Dr. Vibe here. I am the host and producer of the award-winning The Dr. Vibe Show. I'm also a certified empowerment coach for men and those who love them. What I do is help men and those who love them reach their goals and attain their dreams. Just keeping it short like that. And this is a continuing conversation that started earlier on this year about manhood and different aspects of manhood. And I've been very blessed and highly favored to have these gentlemen along in the journey, arm in arm, so to speak, in the journey of manhood. So first off, we've got Mr. Glenn Barker. How are you, Glenn?
Very good. Thank you. It's great to be with you, men.
Excellent. Ed, can you just give a little background on yourself?
Absolutely. For those that are new to the show, I'm Glenn Barker. I'm an executive director at the Mankind Project here in Chicago. It is a worldwide organization. We do over 120 men's weekends a year. We have more than 50,000 men that have gone through our trainings. We have more than 700 men's groups around the country and around the world. And our organization is to help men develop their own sense of a mature masculine that fits in our world and yet empowers the man in a way that makes him strong without being abusive, to be generous, right, without being without going to extremes in all of his endeavors. And welcome to the show. And I have looking for a great evening with you, men.
And also from Louisiana, we have Mr. Don Marvin, Mr. Thompson. What's going on? How you doing?
Not a whole lot, my friend. I'm doing great. How are you guys doing? Glad to be here.
Doing great. And share a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a 25-year educator. Currently the CEO and president of the Lighthouse Education Foundation, which is designed to really promote growth and development amongst our young men, our troubled young men around the country, and to really give them real life experiences so that they can address, as Glenn likes to describe it, a hero's journey, so that they can really work through some of their own realities and really come to stand on their own 2 feet. So that's really where most of my work is done. And I also am a consultant to school divisions around the country, mostly low-performing schools around the country. And I'm based here in New Orleans.
Wonderful. And before we go any further, we'd like to welcome at Afranio Pole, I got it right, who's logged in and watching us live from Brazil tonight.
Wow.
Which
Welcome.
is outstanding. And before we really get to our conversation piece tonight, Glenn, you shared a success story from this program that happened to you today. I love sharing success, so tell us what happened today.
So, as expressed earlier, I got a call today from a man, and I haven't yet been able to return his call, but he had called from Sweden. And he said, I caught some of your shows and looked you up on YouTube and got your number. And he's been in men's work for 18 years. And he says, what you men talked about intrigued me. I'd like to get your coaching. We have to start this up in Sweden. There's a whole he sees a whole change in their environment, and asked if we could spend some time together. So a global reach and a global message to men is what we're talking about here. And I think this speaks to the universality of our conversations with men, and what really does strike a chord in the heart of men. And so my congratulations to the show with this group and the content that we bring.
That's
what it
fantastic. That is great. Well, Glenn, you're driving the ship again tonight, whether you like it or not. You have a very interesting, as always, another interesting conversation piece tonight. When they talk, what do you hear?
Right.
What is
and
that
thank you for that.
Yeah, what is that
What's that all about? Well, what I find very much in doing work with so many men is that what we're often find ourselves doing is unpacking the dilemmas of our life. So if we find ourselves troubled by something, or triggered by something, or incapacitated by something, or frustrated, that takes a bit of unpacking. And one of the parts of this unpacking goes back to basically, what did you hear? Right? And try to turn that into strip away the judgment and strip away the emotion part, and actually, what did you hear? Because that all goes through a filter with all of us. And the other part of that is, what did you judge by what you heard? And I'd like to have this show just drill down into that piece around a perception of hearing. When you're listening to someone and you're watching them, there's something about their energetic, there's something about their skin color or whatever that creates filters. And some of those are good and some of them are tripwires. So you may have a bias, just simply one way or another. So so when they talk, what do you hear?
Mhm.
And then what do you judge by what people say? What you say is judged by others, and what you don't say is going to be judged by others. So I'd like to spend the part of this evening talking about those way we perceive language and communications. And with that, I want to open the conversation.
Oh.
Dr. Thompson, do you? I'll put it this way, Dr. Thompson, do you ever deal with what someone believes they heard versus what they actually heard?
Well, in my work dealing with young people, one of the things that literally drives a lot of their actions are their assumptions. You mentioned earlier about biases. And when people are talking, we live in this world of immediate gratification and immediate response, especially in a highly technological world that we have, which requires an immediate response. So a lot of times, many of us live in our biases. We live in our assumptions. So when I work with young people, most of the time their conflicts are driven by their sole perspective. And usually when they engage in conversations, they're usually only trying to get their point across. And one of the things that I find that is really helpful is teaching young people what empathetic listening is. And we hear that word often, but it's rarely practiced. And the way I describe empathetic listening to young people is I require them to repeat before they respond to what they heard. They have to repeat exactly what the other person said, and then explain what the intent of that statement was before they respond to get clarification. I find that many young people struggle with that, and it's a real eye-opener to how often that they speak from their own position and their own assumptions about the intent, the intent of the other person they're speaking with, and their motives. So you usually have a lot of conversations that are surrounded by conflict, by dual motives, and that literally stops a lot of really productive dialogue.
Mhm. Okay.
Another thing I'd like to bring up around this, and then I thought this would be a good one for listeners if they want to jump in. For instance, just Dr. Thompson and I were just comparing notes after the Dr. Farrakhan speech, the Reverend's speech, and what I've become acutely aware of is not only how we perceive peace as different, but how our cultures read different things into what we see. Where we come from, not only is our social economics one set of values, but our culture is another set of values. So we literally, and I was in a board meeting yesterday where someone says, did you hear what they said? And they picked up a whole nother connotation, a whole nother something that to me was really. So how we perceive things, and it goes deep. It goes deep into our roots, into our naivete, what we're naive about, or what we're jaded about. What we come to look at the world as through this filter, what's truth to us, what has impact and meaning. Somebody may say a joke, where to one person it means nothing. I've seen cases where other folks have been very, very offended, and these things get because of the perception, and it's because of this, like Dr. Thompson says, this inner propensity. Where am I thin-skinned? And what I'd like to go to maybe in the second part of this talk tonight is that it typically reveals a wounding, is really what it is. Where I'm the most thin-skinned, well, it's two parts. I was wounded there, and if I've done my work, I've moved to make that a benefit, so I don't let it happen in the world, or I don't perpetuate it. That's the best part of all of us being wounded individuals. If we turn it into move from the victim place to the and I'll never let that happen in my life or to anybody else, then it becomes a gift. But the sensitivity is still there, and the triggers are still there.
Glenn,
and I think, yes.
I just want to, because I know you two will carry the conversation, which I don't mind, but I want to maybe take a little bit of an off-ramp on this in regards to listening and hearing young boys. Where do they get their qualities on what to listen, how to listen, and how does that continue in their journey into manhood? Because I think that you could certainly address that. But one of the things that I'm very interested in is, where do our young boys acquire their filtering on what they listen and what they hear?
This is Dr. Thompson.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Dr. Thompson.
Most boys are conditioned. You think back, most of us are conditioned very early on to be problem solvers. And that in itself is a barrier to listening. And when I say that, we hear, but we don't listen. True listening, in definition, is being able to interact with another person based on the conditions set through the dialogue. What I think men and young boys in particular are, where there's a barrier, is they're always ready to jump into action. We're action oriented. We're guys. We're problem solvers. So when we hear dialogue, our brains automatically move to solutions. So that's also a limiting factor to some of the listening and the empathetic listening that we're talking about, because I think we're just wired that way. That's just something. When I say wired, I don't mean we're born that way, because I think some of these are socially engineered to be problem solvers. When you take a look at the toys that boys have, we're toys where they're making things, they're designing things to develop a creative thinking mind, right? We now have moved girls and growing STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and promoting that with girls, which promotes that type of thinking amongst them. So they're engaging in a little bit more of a critical analysis in their dialogue, way more so than boys are. Again, that entire conditioning to be problem solvers. As we grow up, when we become husbands and fathers, we're the anchors to the family. We're the breadwinners. We're the problem solvers. Our kids come to us, we solve the problem. So when they speak to daddy, we immediately listen to be able to solve the problem. So I think that's some of the issues that we deal with our young men.
Okay. No problem, Glenn. Keep on going. I wanted to make sure that I got that piece, and I wanted to get your opinions on that, because I think the listening that you learn from a young age is a lot of times for boys the same sort of listening they have when they become men.
So there is modeling, and I have a slightly different take. I think we're hardwired for certain propensities, like men are trees, and we are going to grow to be trees. How that tree grows depends on its environment. So I think there's something in the hardwiring that creates trees for men. You know, they'll find the tool to pick up and make it into a hammer rather than make a dowel. There's something in the hardwiring that drives the behavior to be curious into certain arenas. And I don't see another explanation for that, but socialization does drive that. I think there's another very important piece, and that's the pieces that are missing. So we pick up attitudes from our environment, and how dad, mother, and adult figures, how they react, authority figures react. We pick up clues. We can participate in that or not. We interpret that, and if it's interpreted for us, then we pick up their attitudes. But the rest of it is a story. I want to get to is this: we make up stories. Very much when I work with men, it's really very much about a story. There's been a lousy, or I should say, a troublesome interpretation, or even a true interpretation, but it's a child's interpretation. And from that child interpretation comes a judgment, and from that judgment comes a feeling, and from that becomes an anchor, an emotional anchor to a reaction. This, unchallenged, goes into adulthood. And so when you hear things like, all people are blank, women are blank, men are blank, you just fill in some blank somewhere when you get these generalizations, or you get a visceral reaction to something. That usually comes out of a woundedness, because there's an incident that didn't go down well, wasn't explained well, a story was made up to survive, and then going into adulthood, it really starts to fall down, because it really just isn't a very good solution. It doesn't work really well for an adult. It's a bad coping skill, but that's all you got. And so deconstructing the boy part of the man, which is the stories a lot, and then building up the man in a new paradigm I think that's the core of our work. That's the core of our work as men. And there's not much tutelage around this arena for men, where they can do this without being shamed and judged harshly. And that's the environment we look to provide.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'll let you continue on because I know there's more you want to share with our audience tonight.
Okay, then for instance, let's just do that. So when people talk, what do you hear? Even culturally, like I say, what was interesting to me was the talk with Dr. Thompson shortly after the Farrakhan Million Man March that was on, and just what he perceived from his culture. There's from the things he heard were different things than I heard, and I think we have just as good a time talking about culturally how things land than what was heard, and what's known, just different cultures and how it lands on them was just, for me, I enjoy that very much. We can have these kind of conversations. I don't know if Dr. Thompson wants to go into that a little bit, but do you agree, Dr. Thompson, that and this is all it's unconscious. I mean, it's there, and until we open up and say, what did you hear? And then you heard something, I go, because it has a whole nother lineage piece to it that was not part of my culture, say.
Yeah, well, I think there's several things that lend itself to what you just described, Glenn, and one of them has to do with the level of trust before the conversation begins. I mean, you think about what you and I discuss. I mean, we live in a world right now where this cultural divide is widening, and it's very difficult for many people to even have that type of discussion. So just to be able to be honest about how we felt, what we saw perceptually and contextually about that conversation was evidently and had to be foremost grounded in trust. No, regardless of what position I took, I felt very safe, and you mentioned this, but I was not going to be shamed. I was not going to be minimized. I was not going to be ridiculed. So there were positive assumptions that I made that allowed me to communicate and allowed me not only to be heard, but also to hear. So that was really, I think, a huge part of that conversation. The other part of it, I think you hit on, was the cultural context in which we were listening and speaking. And you said, wow, there were a couple things that we discussed when I heard exactly the same words, but I put them in the different context. And those are not neither good nor bad. Those are just realities of who Glenn Barker is, who Marvin Thompson is, and our experiences, right? So when we were discussing what those perceptual differences were, we literally valued who the other person was to be able to have that discussion. And I think those are things that literally hinder a lot of the conversations because there's not a value tied to the other person. And there's a level of trust that is not always established when we have these deep conversations.
I'm gonna take it off so just a little bit, but you mentioned a very interesting conversation piece, Dr. Thompson. In both of your journeys throughout manhood and working with men at different ages, different stages, what is the state of men valuing each other in today's society?
Oh, that's a good one. Glenn, I would love for you to take this, but I'm going to give you my assumption and I'm going to just say you're the expert on this, truly the expert on this. And what I'm about to say is just purely out of experience dealing with boys from ages 4 to 22. Okay. So what I see is, and this is the developmental stages of young men, it's competition. It is just pure and simple competition. And it's competition for status, whether that status is within a group for boys, a pecking order, just like a wolf pack, an alpha male. Then there's a pecking order or competition for attention of women and girls once they reach that particular age. And then there's a competition for status of achievement. Those are a lot of the things that I see as drivers to competition between boys and men, young men. So I'm going to turn over to Glenn because I know you have a piece to this that is far more in depth than what I just shared.
Well, Dr. Thompson is absolutely right, and these are the net results of our culture. We wind up seeing other men as, and though it's got two sides. There's something also very forgiving about men for each other that I may envy another man and we can go toe to toe, and like I say, then we go have a beer, and we're okay. I mean, and we're really okay. So there's something about men too that is also quite forgiving in a way of each other, and I see a lot of men give each other a pass. It might not be very healthy, but they give each other a pass. You know, he's a guy. Give him a break. You know, so there's some wonderful parts that come with that. But like what Dr. Thompson says, there's a much deeper way that we get set up for this isolation. We live in a Western culture that's very homophobic. Number one, very much so, and what that does is it makes intimacy, the word itself, seem like a dirty word. So we have to find other words for it. So we say, you know, love you, man. You know, these kind of things, because there is a homophobic fear of overstepping the line. And so to show real deep caring, the words I pick, I don't use vulnerability. I use courage. I use deep caring. I don't use affection. Because I think these things land on men in our culture, like it or not. And because we've been set up for these things. So rare is the man that has gotten this balance between getting good fathering, or I should say many mentors in his life, that can demonstrate a strong male that isn't abusive, a loving male that isn't incestuous, you know, a great thinker that isn't out in the stratosphere somewhere, and a good, solid, grandfatherish kind of king energy kind of person that carries responsibility in such a gracious way. These things are woefully absent, and so what we wind up with is very much like Dr. Thompson says. We're a competition for each other, with each other. We don't invest in the relationships with other men necessarily. Men shift in the West, especially shift the relationships to a partner. So there's a partner and there's their work, and I call it the two bubbles men stand on. They got their partner, their main person or two, and then their work. And if one of those collapses, right, then soon maybe the other one collapses, and then the man goes, "What have I been investing in? One or two relationships and my work, and that's been my whole life." So there is a gearing of our manhood that says, if you want to have a happy life, you got to earn it. Men have three options in life: they can work, or they can work.
Can you say that again?
Men, you have three options. Okay, especially in our Western culture, you can work, or you can work. That's your three options.
Wow.
Otherwise, you don't have much value. Many men feel, I think, maybe in their gut, that they're also quite disposable. That if they don't have this kind of earning power, that they really don't have much value, and that brings me sadness. But sadly, that's evidenced by comparison. So men are in an awfully small box. I say they truly are, and they don't have much latitude to be outside of that box, to stay at home dad, the sort of thing, you know. That guy feels sorely out of place. And so rather than condemn those things, I say to myself, how do we best be resourceful in those things? How do I still hold my sovereignty and hold myself up if I'm not working? How do I, as best I can, you know, if I'm going to stay home with the children, be proud of that. And that contribution is a tremendous contribution. And how do we get strong men that, regardless of their circumstance, are very resourceful men, right? So that if the guy's down, he's a winner, and you know it, you know. That's what I'm after for men, so that we always feel resourceful, that we have gifts to give. And it's not so tied, although it's very powerful, to these performance standards that we have.
Okay. I interrupted your flow, Glenn, but I when I hear certain things, I know that between you two, you can certainly address those points. Just want to shout out to at Regeneration LBC, saying he's on the sideline until daddy duty is done for tonight, but he's getting the wisdom. So
Wonderful, good. Go be a great dad.
Yes, go be a great dad. Absolutely. So Glenn, continue on our journey for tonight.
So, judgments, and we got into a little bit this last week. So we call it JADA, judgment substituting for data, and this is the filter we all have. And so what I'm just looking to do tonight is to invite our listeners and Dr. Thompson to just drill into that small area of what do you judge when you hear certain things? People say certain things, and where does that come from? How do you examine that with each other? And what's the story that you're making up? I just think that in itself is a wonderful topic. And I'd invite our listeners to come in and tell us their judgments, right? You see a certain person, you see a certain complexion, a certain color, a certain attitude, a certain weight, a certain look. And these things go unfiltered. Now, I don't condemn judgments. I just say it's time we own them. Take responsibility for them. Okay, we all have judgments. We say, I hear that thing, don't judge. No, you're going to judge. We're all going to judge. If you didn't have judgment, you'd be dead.
Yeah.
You know, some of it really works really well, but others, if it's messing with you and the people in your lives and your happiness, if you don't examine it, then you have a troubled life, and that's not for me. So, what judgments do you have there, Dr. Vibe? What would you say, and all the influences and the interviews that you've done? What are some of the judgments maybe that you hear that behind it, you know, it's a story, and you really have to get to the data to get it right?
Well, before we get to me answering that piece, Regeneration LBC says, who gave us the small box that we're in?
It's a good question.
I think I'll go to that piece. I think the box isn't always there. A child, you know, that will walk off a porch, they'll jump on a stove. You know, they don't have a box, and so some of the box is important because the box keeps you safe. The thing is, many times, if your box will shrink over time, because what you learn is, oh, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to do that again. I learned my lesson. Oh, I'm going to shut up, right? And being safe is smart. You'll survive. But the safer you are, I'll make a judgment right here. I think the safer you are, the smaller your box is. The more you play it safe, the smaller your box is. And what I mean by that box is, yes, that box helps keep you out, right? But it also locks me in. And I deal with a lot of men that have put themselves into a pretty tiny box. And that goes into that other section. Maybe we'll get to that. Okay, so what's at risk for you, mister, to get out of that box? What do you got to risk to get out of that box? Make it bigger. Make it bigger. Huh? You're going to have to get out of it, step onto another level of something, and either you're going to get whacked for it, or you're going to learn to own it. Now you got a bigger space. And I believe some of the things I envy about powerful men is they have no shame about owning a bigger space. They're thin-skinned, but giant hearts. I think it's a wonderful way to be as a man, right? Right? I mean, I'll say a thick armor. I got thin skin, but I got this giant heart, and I'm safer outside of the box than I've ever been, because I'm not fearful of being hurt, because I understand a lot of that is about you, not about me. So I can keep a boundary. I can let people in quicker and closer, without fear of abusing them or me being abused. Right? And I also know when to shut that down. Okay, I'm getting into an arena here where I need a little protection and I need maybe a little distance, and to be able to navigate that, it gives me a connection that I never had before. A level of honesty, and speaking to truth. That in ways that I've just been really enjoying this part of my life that has maybe say things that just lay enough sidewalk in front of somebody so they could take 3 more steps. Lay enough concrete down, just to say, it's safe for you to walk here. Don't go too far. Don't go too far, but there's a few steps. Yeah. There's a few steps.
But how much does a pure motive have? I see that as a large part of that, enabling component that you're talking about, where you're able to walk through some of those threats, some of those fears that underlie, some of that box that keep you in that box. And I think a lot of times if people really come to grips with their motive, what's my true reason for doing it? If they can stand on a platform that says this is why, I think many people struggle with that. when they try to expand their box. Does that make sense to you? Do you see that happen quite a bit?
Oh, absolutely, Dr. Thompson. And it's, again, it kind of also leaps into who would I be without that story? So let me put this phrase out there and see if this can open the lines for some of our callers. All right. Maybe write this one down, everybody. Knowing the truth changes nothing. Okay, let me put that. There's two parts. So often what we'll find, and tell me if you don't observe the same thing, is the aha moment. Ah, I get it. I get what's driving the bus. Part one. Okay. Part two is so that's finding the lie. You know, it's letting go of the lie that changes everything. So knowing the truth really changes nothing. So what? I know the truth. What is the lie that I've been holding on to? That's what will change things, because that's really my core belief. The lie. And the lie is the story. So I'm going to find out the truth. No, everybody in the world is not the way I perceived. Ah! Part two. So what's the lie I've been holding on to? What's the story I've been making out of? If I don't let go of that, I think that's the reason for a lot of, I think it's a half-baked self-help solution that's been around for a long time. The aha moment. So what? Yeah. You got a keen grasp of the obvious. Yay. Okay, well, I mean, I think it stands for something, but I don't think it's really the full answer. The full answer is so. What is the lie I've been holding on to?
Interesting. The regeneration is listening. I hope he's paying attention on Daddy Duty. It sounds like he's spending more time on the blog commenting, but he's saying, I expand my box now and try to act if there is no box, because I've seen enough life where I was okay and thrived and healed after I stepped out of the box. I've got evidence that I can step out.
Good man. But I'll comment about the work that Dr. Thompson and I are in part, and I'm looking to have my organization back his organization more and more. It's because I think those first environments where we can step out of the box has to be a container. It has to be contained. So the first thing a man needs to do is get out of the box. He's going to be really vulnerable. He's going to take down his armor. He's going to walk into something, and like Dr. Thompson said, if he gets shamed or judged, it ain't going to happen again to me. You're done. You're done. Go home. It's over. So in order to create a challenging environment for men that says, okay, me first, I'm going to show you something, you know. I'm going to show you something about me that I don't want you to know, you know. And that's a risk. But I think us in leadership have to take that risk in order to let other men know, oh, geez, that guy, he's got that. He's unburdening himself around that. That's and if we could do that in a good way, and I can show that I'm not judged and shamed, this builds a tremendous, powerful trust between men. And if this is done in an environment that says this is the place to stretch, this is the first place to out this thing, and to get the big shackles off it, you know, the big barnacles, then say, now that you know, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to pack it back away and you go in your box? That's your choice. That's okay. But if you're telling me that you're trapped, what do you want to have happen now? And that's the stretch part. That's a week in and week out usually with what I do with men. That allows me to keep stops me from tripping over the same wire. Hopefully. Glenn. So that part of the story goes like I'll do a little entertainment piece.
Sure.
So here's a good look at men's work, if you're interested. I've gone through my life walking down the same street, falling in the same hole, taking a long time to get out. Now I know that there's a hole there, and I don't fall in it as often. Someday I'll even get out faster. Someday I'll even get out and not do as much damage. Someday I may be able to even avoid the hole. And if I really do my work well, someday I might even pick another street. It's a gradual thing, men. Understand, right? The momentum in our lives and the tracks that we go down, the things that we know are sometimes a great gift or an awful, awful trap. And a life unexamined. And so this is part of we're calling it men's work. And part of what troubles me is that we have to explain this now. I believe that there was a time when the young men were taken out by the elders, and these things were explained incrementally through their whole lives. And I'm not glorifying pre-industrialized societies. But this is so woefully absent that this conversation has to be explained, where at one point I believe it probably has to explain if you didn't do it. How could you raise your son and not know this? How could we let our young people go through their lives without having an experience of older men with some wisdom that aren't there to shame and blame them, and not give them a pass either? This is my charge, and this is, I know, part of a lot of men's on this panel. And if you men are listening, you women are listening, as to take value and take stock in that and learn this tutelage that's being offered for the sake of our families, because this is not just about men. This is about how men are in relationship. This is in their personal relationships. This is how men are in business, how they run the country. We're looking at presidents. I've got a certain lens that I look through. Dr. Thompson, do you have a certain lens that you look through when you look to leaders of our country?
I always do. And
Please.
I think, it always, when I look at leadership, and then those expectations and assumptions are drivers of that lens. They shape the lens that I'm looking through. So like everyone else, leadership has to produce something. And like you said earlier, it's not the story. It's not just telling the truth. It's doing something with what you have. So as we look at our society today, many would say that leadership is just telling a good story. Because when we look at the results, we don't see that they meet our expectations. So to me, that is always the benchmark, the measure. Does my leader act? And when we step that away from those that are extraneous to the world and move it to ourselves, we're leaders, and we have to see ourselves as leaders. Every man is leading something, whether he's leading himself, his family, his community, he's leading something. So for me, when I look at leadership, what I expect, I also inspect internally. So if I'm actually doing what I'm expecting, because I can't hold another man to a level of accountability that I'm not striving for myself. So for me, leadership is holistic. It's not external. It literally is a duality of perceptions and actions and realities. So that's as I work with young men, they like to project a lot. And as you were saying earlier, Glenn, the story. Their story is sometimes my experience. Well, you did that, so. Well, there's excuse built in right there. And the longer that's continued, they are literally building their own story around someone else's experiences, and they become observers to the world. They never learn to hold their own place in the world. And as you said earlier, if we don't have men who will hold these young men accountable, put them in their place when they need to be, those are a lot of the times where I find young men need to be put in their place, not blaming others or using others' experiences and their observations as their paradigm. Well, because it happened to Johnny, I guess this. Oh, hold on, son. That's Johnny. What is it that you want, and what would you do? Those are things that I find in leadership gets hampered early on in our young men, because they literally live through, and our society's set up that way. We talked about the box and what shapes that box. Some of it's experiences, but when you look externally, there are a lot of images and literally structured images that our young men build paradigms around in the absence of men. In the absence of men to redirect, explain, and give context to the things that they see and the experiences they have. Those are huge barriers to the development of our young men.
And I just want to add on there too myself, I have a question for the men out there. When you listen to something, as Glenn and Dr. Thompson, what filters are you using when you're listening to something? Doesn't matter what stage of life you're in as a man. When you listen to something, what are you hearing? Consider the source. What are you hearing? Do you believe everything in first Do you have to find the source? Do you have what judgments? And that's a continual theme in our conversation: judgments and boundaries. Do you put on your listening? Do men do that on a continuous basis? Like if Dr. Thompson tells me something and a person who I've never met before, am I at the stage of my manhood where I can filter the noise? I can filter the right from the wrong. You know, there's it's a song that I thought about tonight. There's a song by a group I really like, and the title's called "Are You Hearing What I Hear?" And both of you had a conversation about Mr. Farrakhan, and Glenn, you heard something different. Dr. Thompson, you heard something different. We can sit two men together, you put them in the same room, listen to the same message, you're going to get two different things. Where did they get the foundation to filter and understand and decipher that message?
I'll answer some of this. For instance, there is a if I come from we compared it to if we go to China, if I don't know the customs of the Chinese people or any group of people around the world, I may interpret a gestures or handshakes or not facial. Usually, facial is emotional kind of clues are very much the same across cultures. But certain cultural things that I may say something that's culturally insensitive, and I don't even know it. And I think what runs through cultures is also a wisdom. So, for instance, Dr. Thompson here would say, this kind of thing speaks to a whole lineage that brings a depth to a part of the message that I understand contextually because it was said, but the fact that it maybe carries weight or doesn't carry weight anymore because of the cultural history of these kind of speakers or this kind of rhetoric. There is a history in the culture, in every culture, that has its, oh, that's the same thing, or wow, this is no, that's really, really uniquely different. And that a lot of that can be cultural based, and I think for me, I'm simply fascinated by that because it brings to me a depth of understanding where I may hear something that sounds very impactful, but someone in any culture could start to me and go, no, that's what they all say. You know, we've been hearing that for 50 years here, and I go, wow. You know, because they speak out for something, or for or against something. It doesn't even matter what it was. It's just that the more interesting, the more dynamic a person like Trump, right? Or Minister Farrakhan, the more charismatic and more larger in life people, they seem to trigger more people, and it's just interesting. I just find that fascinating, and it brought me to this conversation today to say, look at the filters. Right? And this is not good or bad, it just is. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's also a point now where I hoped for, this is what I hear, it's about code switching. So what I was trying to get to in this conversation is, do we understand that when we're in the presence of another culture, that can be from the streets of Chicago to a college campus, right? That could be a college campus to another culture, right? We're moving to such a multicultural world. To be ignorant of this is to step on landmines. To abuse it, I think, is an abuse of power. But I think our ability to at least navigate is our best hope. And so the need for the depth of understanding and compassion, like Dr. Thompson says, empathy, and I think to take the time to examine our own presumptions and stories. This discernment is what we're talking about as adult men, I think, is critically important. And this is what I want to bring to the conversation. And
Glenn,
Dr. Thompson, well, he has a great piece on discernment. I'd like to see him bring it to us.
Go ahead, Dr. Thompson, about discernment, because I was going to ask, where are the places that men are getting their discernment from, whether right or wrong?
That's a real good question.
So I don't know if Dr. Thompson wants to take that one on before he talks about discernment, but I think that's an important piece. Where are men getting their discernment from?
Well, I think generally, if you ask any man where they're getting their discernment from, they'll say wherever I'm winning,
Whoa.
right? Wherever I'm winning.
That's
Or
a
my
good.
partner.
That's a powerful statement.
My mother,
Yeah.
the woman in my life, she'll
Yeah,
tell me.
exactly.
She'll tell me.
Exactly. So, discernment to me is literally about having goals. You can't get up every day. Nobody does. No one gets up every day and just says, I hope they don't. And just says, let's see what happens. There's always an anticipatory set. There's assumptions, there are expectations. And with those assumptions and those expectations of the day, you carry your biases with you. And every interaction is influenced by those assumptions, those expectations, and those biases. Discernment is the ability to really challenge yourself. And we're talking about listening and this empathetic listening component, the ability to actually hear the other person and also to be heard. And a lot of times, most conflicts are literally communication conflicts. I rarely ever are real conflicts on the true issue, because all issues, if all parties are heard and understood, can be resolved through compromise at some point. Not all, but most, the majority of them can be. Some are just fundamentally opposing ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But discernment for me, really, and the way I've seen it work well with young people and with parents dealing with young people, is to really get to the heart of the matter, the why question. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
Every problem that I've ever encountered with young people, what I'm looking at is not the issue. What I'm looking at is the outcome of other issues. Glenn alluded to this before, and this is those deep-seated issues. And if our young people learn how to recognize them, and our parents learn how to not really react to problems, but to use discernment to really not make assumptions about, well, I think it's this. I hear a lot of parents do that. And they say it to me, well, I think it was when he was 4 and this happened. Well, that's what you think. What does he think? He did it. Why don't you ask him? He's 16 years old. Why don't you ask him?
Yeah.
And a lot of times I find parents are hard-pressed to hear the truth. It's not his dad, it's you. It's something they've been doing, something they haven't been doing. I mean, one of the most honest conversations I ever had in my life was with my mother at 40 years old about something she had been doing with me my entire life. And when I told it to her, she was just shocked. She went, I don't do that. And if it were not for my brother sitting there, go, Mom, yeah, you've been doing that to him as long as I can remember. And she was like totally shocked, a little hurt, and looked at me like, oh my God, I say, Mom, I'm good with it. But now you understand why I respond to you this way for so many years. At some point, I developed my own coping mechanism for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, she alluded to that was just the way I was. I mean, she did not discern anything from it. She made up her own story around it. That was her comfort. It's like, well, Marvin's just that way. No, he's not. Marvin's that way because it's something you've been doing for 40 years. So that was a test moment for me, but that was me holding my place. This is that when they talk, what do you hear?
Yeah. When
she talked, I heard this. When I talked, she heard that. It took me over 40 years to go, hey, Mom, let me share something with you. And, the level of maturity, our relationship had never dissolved. It was actually, that conversation could never happen if it weren't good. But it just took it to another level as we moved towards another stage of life together. These are things, when we talk about discernment, people usually don't stop and look at the behavior and ask themselves, why is this person behaving that way? I know what I see. I know how I feel about it. I'm making my assumptions, but let me take a deep breath and go, why? Right? And you know how to get at that is usually asking the question. Why do you feel so strongly about that? Why is it affecting you that way? that opens doors for people to really be open and honest and to feel that they're really being heard. It's little things that we do that actually can positive reinforce bad situations, can literally turn them around just by asking the question. Why do you feel this way? Why do you feel so strongly about this? Tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
But I taught this to people, and they've used it as tools of like, let me just say this. Well, you know what? If you just start using it as words to just continue the conversation and further your agenda, it's not going to happen. You've got to truly mean it. But you've got to be true in your convictions to engage in the conversation to actually elicit the response that you want from that person.
Got it.
You hear what he just did, though? Dr. Thompson just said something quite wonderful, and I want to grab this little piece. He moved as an mature man from being a fixer, which is his boy hero, right, to be a discerner. Why, instead of going, oh, I got to fix this, or this is what you should do, right? He went to, why is this so important? Why is this such a charge for you? You know, I can't emphasize how powerful that is in every aspect of your life, because now you're an ally without being a rescuer.
Mm-hmm.
You know how big I really want to drill into this, and I don't know how to emphasize how important I believe. Right, what Dr. Thompson said here, this could change lives. This alone. If you could switch.
Well, Glenn, it fits in the drama triangle. It's the drama triangle. Everything we're talking about, there's one point on this triangle. You're either the victim, the rescuer, or the problem, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to be one of those, and everything we're talking about fits into that drama triangle that you allude to so frequently.
Absolutely, but with that discernment that you put in there, and consider doing a discernment talk, Dr. Thompson, truly, because it's you're citing these kinds of examples, and it's kind of the way you're hardwired. Really do so, because these are teaching moments, and I know I didn't get these growing up, and so if you want to know the value of a man, we can say don't judge. No, that's not it. You can judge. Discernment, like Dr. Thompson says, means I'm not going to fix your problem. I'm not here to fix your problem. I'm here to ask you, so what makes it so important to you?
Yeah.
What makes why is this so charged with you?
A couple of years ago when we were shooting the TV show, the documentary Blackboard Wars, after one session I had with a kid, it may be a week. It was a really tough week. A lot of issues with our kids, a lot of emotional issues. Here in New Orleans, a lot of our young people are still dealing with some of the drama and the aftermath of Katrina. The producer pulled me aside and he says, how are you able to, these kids walk into your office and they're ready to explode. They're exploding all the way to your office, and they walk out of here hugging you, shaking your hand, and they come flooding back. I said, well, here's my goal. I'm not here to solve their problem. I'm not here to give them discipline. Marvin Thompson can get hit tomorrow. He can leave tomorrow. I could die of a heart attack. And I don't want them to rely on me. What I need them to do is to understand, number one, whom to listen to, who is really your helper, and how can you help yourself. So what they got from me was no shame. They did not get any judgment. I always asked them, I understand what happened, because kids they live in moments. They love to tell the story, right? They learn that when they break a glass at 3 years old, mom goes, what happened? They tell the story, right? Nothing. Mom doesn't say, well, here's how we're going to prevent that. They go, don't do that.
Dog.
Yeah, don't do it again. Yeah, don't do it again. Well, I get into, okay, how did the glass get broken? What do you think caused the glass to get broken?
Right on.
It's great.
Right?
That's great.
Well, usually they usually have never been questioned to that level of accountability. And it's not accountability to be punished, right, but they realize it's like, dude, I'm just trying to make sure you don't do this again.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure you don't do it? Because to me, when we work with young people, they're growing up. They're going to screw up. They're going to make mistakes. Nobody who's over 20 did not do that. So you're going to experience those things later in life. how do you develop and acquire the skills necessary to wade through those issues as they're presented in different factions at different levels and different scenarios later in your life? You're going to have a thought process, an internal thought process that helps you self-evaluate. And those are things that help people hear, discern things about themselves, and also discern in others, particularly with the amount of peer pressure that our young people are faced with today and always have been. So to me, it's just always powerful. And he said to me, the producer said, I've never seen kids come in the most volatile situations and so consistently not only leave the office, but I can pass them days later and they are different in the way that they're interacting with other people. And I said, well, that's an empowerment component, because those kind of conversations literally are enlightening and they're empowering other people. And that to me is how you begin to really develop stronger engagement processes with people.
Good stuff. Well, gentlemen, we're winding down on the show tonight, and I just want to say thanks to everyone who chimed in, especially Regeneration LBC, also Afrenio Poll. Thanks very much. So before we shut it down for another episode, Dr. Thompson, some final thoughts on when they talk, what do you hear to men?
Well, I just love the conversation, and it flowed so well in our last discussion about judgments. And the conversation is the next step towards those judgments. I think if we all begin to literally practice a little empathetic listening first with ourselves before we do it with others, I think it ties into what Glenn says. When we think about the things we want to do as men in our lives, examine how we feel about it and what truly is driving how we're feeling. Because once we're true to ourselves, it's going to be easier to be honest with others and also feel very comfortable and non-threatened about what we hear from others.
Okay. And Glenn.
So final thoughts. Men, all of us, everything we do and don't do has an impact and a consequence, like it or not. What we say and we don't say has an impact and consequence. What we don't say and how we say it. All of these things have an impact and a consequence in the world and in our lives, like it or not. So I'm an advocate for men's councils. I'm an advocate for forums like this. I am an advocate for not going alone. I'd rather be alone. I'd rather live in a cave and throw rocks at passers-by. That's my preference. But the truth of it is that's a little box that'll keep me safe, and but it's not good for me. And so I need to push myself almost every single day to be out. And when I am, I find, how can I put this, men? I find that the most private part of me is the most universal part of most men. The way that I want to isolate, the way that I want to do it myself, the way I want to feel I have space and strength from the inner peace in me, and the things that I fear, and the way I have to stretch myself. When I expose that to other men, they actually say, "Oh my gosh, this is." So I've come to believe that what we can get in community, which is could be very difficult for men, is the one thing that will make us maybe the most scariest thing we'll ever do. But it'll make us stronger. I also believe that the women in our lives, the mother figures in our lives, will help us take away our pain, and that's what they're wonderful for. They will help soothe our pain and give us comfort. I don't necessarily believe that makes us stronger. I believe there's a union with men that does make me stronger. I think there is a challenge that I get with men that makes me get out of the box with a helping hand up, not a rescue. And I've come to appreciate that in my life. And so I'm not a big believer to just lecture and say this is what we should be doing. But I will say this, is to say men's councils. And so maybe I'll put this in because we're already closing, that if you in your area, in your group, you as a person, would like to start a men's group, a men's council, there's good rules for how to run a men's group and how to keep it safe and challenging. I believe this, the wisdom of a circle of men is what grows me as a man, not my own aha moments. It's the wisdom of reflection, like we see here tonight. This is what gives me a solidarity from the inside. So I challenge you, if you want to start a men's group in your town, in your organization, you can call me, Glenn Barker, from the Mankind Project, at 312-243-6900. 6743. 312-243-6743. MKPChicago.org can be found on the internet. Ron Barker's on Facebook, and MKP Chicago's on Twitter. Please come join us next time for another great round with great men. Thanks for having me, Dr. Vibe.
Right back at you. And Dr. T, I'd be remiss if I don't give an opportunity for you to share your contact information.
Sure. You can reach me by email at drT@drteducates.com. You can also visit our website at lighthouseeducationfoundation.org. And you can find me on Twitter at Dr. T Educates.
Wonderful. And I am blessed, highly favored, and a magnet for miracles to be hosting these ongoing conversations. I'm Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, also certified men's empowerment coach. You can catch me at the drvibeshow.com, drvibeshow.com. You can also check out, it's in beta right now, Express Your Vibe, where that's my men's coaching site, men's empowerment coaching site. Also, too, if you want to follow me at Twitter, it's at drvibeshow. And also, if you want to email me for now, dr.vibeshow@thedrvibeshow.com. And something new, because I always like stretching my mentors, that if you're on Periscope, I'll show it right there. I'm now doing daily 5-10 minute messages for men. So if you're on Periscope,
Nice.
just look up at drvibeshow.com. The title I did tonight was Men, How is Your Relationship with Yourself? Just starting to do 5-10 minute things. It started on Sunday. I just picked up a topic, and about a whole pile of people came on, and I asked them, do you want me to do daily stuff? And they said yes. So I'm listening to what the audience is saying. One of my goals is to get Dr. T and Mr. Barker to start doing some Periscopes, but that'll take some time.
Not a bad idea.
So we're going to coach them, because it took some time to get them on Blab. They're there now. So now will probably be the next step to see if they want to do some Periscope stuff. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles and your solution for someone's problem. Again, a big thanks again to Regeneration LBC. We know you wanted to be on tonight, but being a father is more important than being on any Blab. As always, God bless. Peace be all. Keep the